Morning team, it's me, your favourite, Jordan at the screen, and today I am doing a video response where I'll be answering the questions: what is feminism, where do non-feminist people stand, and what is to be done. Much of what you're about to hear has actually been lifted from an article I was writing. When I became aware of this video request, the 3 questions, I decided to lift the content from said article and use it in this video. So if any particular segments of my answers seem irrelevant, unnecessary, convoluted, superfluous, you know why. So let's get cracking. What is feminism? This is a bit of a contentious question. Both sides of the argument seem incapable of adequately answering this question, so I can only offer my personal subjective definition. Feminism is a social phenomenon, a movement composed of people. Duh. Ergo, it would be proper to define a social phenomenon by the people that inhabit it. And yes, I'll be considering the perceptions of people on both sides. It would also be worthwhile to consider the sentiments and messages each of these people preach. As feminism is a large movement with lots of members, there is of course different views and perspectives. So, in my somewhat modest troubles, I've managed to define what I call the axes of feminism. On the y-axis is power, and on the x-axis is knowledge. Don't know why I did it inverted. The x-axis is divided into 3 categories, from positive, pro-feminism, and negative, non- and anti-feminism, whereas the y-axis is defined simply as 1 for yes, and -1 for no. The x-axis categorizations are really simple and easy to apply. I have found that all the feminists I've come across fit neatly into one of these 3 categories. They are, in order, ignorant, delusional, and misandrist. I think very highly of feminism. These 3 categories form a 3-step flow. If one would like to view it as such, at any point along this evolution, a feminist can quit and become non-feminist, or better yet, anti-feminist. I shall start from the centre and work outwards. Ignorant. This is the first stage of the evolution of a feminist, and by far the category with the highest population. These feminists are your run-of-the-mill average people who believe feminism is synonymous with equality. They are the feminists who genuinely believe the dictionary definition of feminism and are confident with that assertion. They have been through the education system. They have been taught that women had to fight for the right to vote, whereas men did not. They have been convinced that women's rights are being subjugated, though most I've come across only apply this to women abroad. They tend not to perceive themselves as victims of oppression or subjugation. They have, rather innocently, come to the conclusion that feminism is tantamount to equality and women's rights. These feminists have no malice. They are ignorant of the greater workings of the feminist movement. They probably know very little of the Istanbul Convention or of people such as Kate Millett. They are just regular people living regular lives and are genuinely unaware of what feminism gets up to. These feminists are not the enemy, but instead are ambivalent outsiders. All that is required is for them to be educated or, in most cases, left alone. And many anti-feminists started in this position as well, growing up as feminists, working their way through the education system, being taught this paradigm, the status quo. So many of us actually understand and empathise with them and know why they're in their position, and so therefore don't see them as the enemy. But also many anti-feminists are ignorant still of feminism, especially those whom espouse the anti-third wave feminism rhetoric, claiming only modern day feminism is the enemy. These sorts fail to recognise the violent terrorist nature of the suffragettes, nor would they speak of Ellen Pizzi's banishment from her refuge by the feminists. Many do this out of plain ignorance. I personally find them to be the most annoying of non- and anti-feminists. It doesn't take much effort to do a simple bit of research if you're going to hold yourself in this position. Might as well at least understand where you're standing. Understand where you're standing. Good words. These feminists can be both with power and without. Those without are, as I just mentioned, the run-of-the-mill everyday person. Those with power, however, such as low-level MPs, teachers, business owners, etc., they are to be questioned. They are the feminists who are unwittingly following feminist doctrine and policy without really understanding the greater ramifications of it. Such an example would be a person of authority, perhaps in a local government, supporting violence against women and girls initiatives without being fully aware that violence against men and boys, exists. At this point, a feminist can learn what feminism is really about. But this leaves the feminist with a dilemma. Do they face the truth and reject feminism, or do they accept this truth and continue with feminism? Should the feminist continue with feminism, he or she can either attempt to block out these negative thoughts, perhaps suffering some cognitive dissonance in the process, and become delusional, or embrace these negative ideas and become misandrist. Again, to reiterate, the feminists here believe feminism to be the advocacy of women's rights on the grounds of equality of the sexes. The non- and anti-feminists here are chiefly those who are only against the insane third-wave feminism, and they will act accordingly. The feminists will, in the name of feminism, act with egalitarianism, and the anti-feminists will only be against the nutters we see on YouTube with the dyed hair and the screaming, rambling cacophony of bullshit they come up with. Anyway, delusional. The delusional type of feminist is someone who is aware of what feminism is actually doing, the genuine harm it is causing, yet still identifies as a feminist. They can either blanket refuse to accept the truth, or more insidiously attempt to justify it or apologize for it. Such examples I can give are low-level YouTube feminists, not naming any names. These are the sorts who still believe feminism is for equality, yet when presented with the evidence to the contrary, often overwhelmingly so, they still stick to their guns. These sorts of feminists can also be found at university campuses, participating in these rather idiotic Reclaim the Night demonstrations and espousing pay gap nonsense. They are the feminist sans neon hair, excess body hair, weird piercings, I am one to speak. If you have ever watched any of these videos of the Reclaim the Night demonstrations, then you would have no doubt seen them be asked rather simple questions about the demonstration and the message it is promoting, only for them to fail to answer and run away, sometimes quite literally. An example of such a question could be, reclaim the night from whom, and when did the night not belong to them? These are the delusional feminists. I would not necessarily categorize these as the enemy. Sure, their hearts are in the right place, but they are delusional. Many delusional feminists who I've personally come across tend not to hold positions of power. They are not feeding the great machine of feminism. Those who are delusional are the feminists who I've met at university campuses, at debates, events, film screenings, etc., who have had their views challenged, and in part to the cognitive dissonance, but also because the red pill is so fucking tough to swallow, most bring it up on their first time. They revert back to old habits because that's where they feel safe. I can empathise. Being red-pilled is a make or break moment, depending on the strength of the pre-existing conditions and how big said red pill is. Again, I would not hold any malice against these people. Sure, they can be annoying as fuck sometimes, but if we have a go at them, if we attack them, they're going to perceive us as the enemy. So a delusional feminist can sit in this equilibrium of sorts and never change. A delusional feminist can also break down and fall into one of two paths. One path leads to non-feminism, the other path leads to misandry. It depends on whether the feminist accepts the misandrist practices of feminism. However, an example of a delusional feminist in power is Joe Biden. See his speech at George Mason University. He is evidently aware of the issue of campus sexual assault, yet, as the delusional old man that he is, he only views it from his gynocentric position. I would not go so far as to call him misandric, but moronic. However, he was the one who authored the Violence Against Women Act. So, yeah, there's certainly that to be questioned. There are many delusional anti- and non-feminists. These are, as mentioned earlier, people who fail to recognise the toxicity of the previous waves of feminism. Yet, the difference here is they are aware of such issues. They are more than willing to criticise third-wave feminism for the violence, yet are shamefully silent about the violence of the previous iterations. The definition of feminism given by the delusional feminists is the same as that of the ignorant feminists, yet they are not so confident in their position. The misandrist feminist. They encompass all the negativity that is feminism and are the driving force behind it as a movement. Those without power are the easiest to recognize. Think Big Red, Trigglypuff, Mattress Girl, etc. You know, the typical neon hair, unkempt appearance, aposematic homunculi. They also inhabit most of the positions at any given university or college's feminist society. The misandrists are also the majority of the influential feminists in power. Polly Neate, Alison Saunders, Vera Baird, Harriet Harman, Catherine Spiller, Jess Phillips, Sophie Walker, Tessa Munt, Hillary Clinton. The list goes on. These feminists hate men, but they get around this by not referring directly to hating men. They use buzzwords such as patriarchy. There is nowhere to go from here. Feminists in power will sit here, unless if unseated, or if crisis and possible reincarnation brings them to salvation. The misandrist feminists not in power serve no purpose. Take, for example, the stark difference in message pertaining feminism from, say, Big Red and the National Organization of Women. Big Red claimed feminists are not trying to take your kids' mothers as caregivers as part of patriarchy or something to the same effect. Yet the National Organization of Women will not even sit at the same table with shared parenting advocates. The misandrist feminists not in power are not, in my mind, considered part of the active feminist machine. They are nothing but comic relief. That is what they shall be treated as. However, they do seem to have some considerable influence at university campuses when they decide to get violent. That is the only influence they have, the only power they have. If campus security would actually step the fuck up and do its job, then these misandrist feminists would be nothing but a slight little blight on the horizon, a lolcow, as it were. Anyway, it is the misandrist feminists in power that we must focus our attention on, in my humble opinion. They are the active components that are driving change. They are the movers who suck £300 million a year plus to support female victims of domestic violence, claiming they are doing so for the victims, despite 2/3 of the money going on staff costs. They also want to increase rape convictions, only against men, obviously, whilst denying the existence of female perpetrators and male victims. They support and fund the Duluth model and the patriarchy theory with intention to legislate such ideology. They are the enemy. They do all of this whilst claiming that feminism is equality. Whilst actions speak louder than words, it means nothing if no one is paying any real attention to the action. See the Istanbul Convention. These feminists are able to enact their wicked misandrist desires, knowing that if anyone holds them to account, they can simply retort back to equality, with women's rights activists, feminism is equality. They are capitalizing on the ignorance of the masses. Another example of this two-faced mentality that I keep referencing would be the feminists storming the red carpet at the London premiere of Suffragette. Sisters Uncut, the feminists who organised the protest, said they did so because of cuts to domestic violence services. Remember, they receive £300 million a year. One thing Sisters Uncut didn't tell you is that these domestic violence shelters were told to extend their services to men or lose funding because not offering these services to men is a form of sex-based discrimination. In other words, sexism. We have equality laws over here that prevent such behaviours, or prohibit. The shelters did not listen, carried on with their sex-based discrimination, and lost funding. However, misandrist feminists without power will often outright make misandrist comments and will happily promote feminism as an anti-male ideology. They will happily denigrate men and speak of female superiority, just like the second-wave feminists in power did. For evidence, see Andrea Dworkin, Kate Millett, Catherine McKinnon. The definition of feminism given by misandrist feminists is the dictionary definition of feminism. Their actions speak tones, though, in opposition. Their public faces preach equality and equity. Their practices enact female chauvinism and male suffering. The definition of feminism given by misandrist feminists without power can vary. The enlightened ones, by enlightened I mean honest, they will openly gloat their misandry. The narcissistic feminists will rather neurotically claim that feminism is equality. So to summate, there are multiple forms of feminist, and they have differing views of what feminism is and what its goals are. The feminism that concerns me is the feminism in power, the most dangerous, the misandrist feminists. Their policies and actions cement into society patriarchy theory. They promote female chauvinism and denigrate men and masculinity, whilst sanctimoniously proselytizing freedom. Feminism, as the idea it purports itself to be, is great, but it only exists as a fantasy in a dream. In reality, it is a toxic hate movement that capitalizes on young, impressionable men and women. It bastardizes people's suffering so as to use it as a political weapon. It is a disgrace, a necrotic cancer, and it must be purged from society. The feminists in power are the feminists we should be against. They are the ones who espouse anti-male rhetoric in the form of policy and practice. They are the ones who bring about the Violence Against Women Act, and they are the ones who outright ignore male suffering and male victims of rape and violence. They are the ones with the distorted view. They are the ones we should be focusing our attention on. But again, that's just my humble opinion. So, the second question, where do non-feminist people stand? Varies, as just discussed. There are various non- and anti-feminists. It's only the ignorant who are against third-wave feminism. I personally, as I've made the case very clear, I'm against the misandrist feminists in power. That is what we should be standing up against, and where we should be placing our feet. So, which leads me into the third and final question, what is to be done? Helping services. Volunteer, donate, research, promote. These services are overwhelmingly, hilariously underfunded. As we just mentioned about women's domestic violence services over here in the UK receiving 300 million plus a year. Men's services, barely 30k, depending on which service you look at. We need the funding, we need the support, we need the volunteers. We do not have that. We do not have the unification. We do not have the people sacrificing their time to help. We also need to lobby government, start small work up, because going straight to MPs and trying to lobby government on the massive scale hasn't worked. We've tried, it's not been overly successful, Istanbul Convention being our example. If we can start small, get into local councils, start pushing there, I think that would be a good idea. Cataloguing the actions of the enemy. People don't know that feminism is the enemy because they don't know what feminism is up to. If we can actually get a list of what they're doing, detail what they were doing, when, how they did it, and the ramifications of their actions, and showing actually what they're saying and what they're doing are two separate things, then we can break the myth that feminism is about equality. Specifically, one thing we definitely need to do is unify the movement, because feminism is very good in the sense that they've brought themselves together. They have created a sisterhood. Some of the issue here that we have is that many of these people who are non or anti-feminists do so because they are in a perspective or position where they've been damaged by feminism, by the overarching umbrella. Some have had their kids taken away, some have been victims of domestic abuse. They've all got their own reasons for being here. False allegations is another one. Trying to unify them is difficult because they're all fighting different battles in different directions. We do need some sort of umbrella service that can bring them together, but we can't do that because we don't have the funding or the manpower. Fuck. Another issue is that many of the people in the movement, they can't exactly openly denounce feminism or criticize it because their jobs and livelihoods depend upon it. The word feminism needs to be held to account, which is why we go to catalogue the enemy. So when we denounce feminism, they go, oh, but feminism is for equality, we can hit them with a huge long essay of things that feminism has done to prove that they're not for equality. Education. Education. Get into education, get into schools. The majority of teachers are female, pushing a pro-female narrative, often at the expense of men and boys. So many young boys are falling behind in school. This anti-male narrative is permeated from kindergarten or nursery, whatever you want to call it, all the way up to university. It is rife. And if we could get a genuine education of feminism into schools and into the world and into the mainstream, then, well, to put it simply, if more people knew what feminism was actually up to, there would be less feminists. And if there were more people knew what feminism was actually up to, there would be more anti-feminists. And this will help in changing the cultural narrative. But again, it needs funding, it needs support and manpower, it needs people to actually get up and do it. It's a fucking huge uphill climb. We are Sisyphus, essentially. Oh, that's actually quite a negative outlook. Fuck. Anyway, we also, and this is the biggest problem, the underlying issues, we need to counteract gynocentrism and redress the balance of the human gender empathy gap. The former can be defeated because gynocentrism has capitalized on the human gender empathy gap, but the human gender empathy gap will exist ad infinitum. Unfortunately, the human gender empathy gap starts from when we are kids and exists to when we die. It is ingrained into us biologically, and for good reason. It developed and evolved as a survival mechanism. I would go into great detail about it, but that's not what this video is about today. Maybe one day I will do an educational video on the human gender empathy gap. But we need to overcome it. Unfortunately, we're looking at 50,000 years plus of evolutionary psychology. Feminism, you might think, it's only been around for 100 in its current form, it is 100 years plus. You might think, hey, we can do the same, we can easily fight against it. Well, it's only capitalizing on the human gender empathy gap. But we'll never be able to overcome it. Gynocentrism, yes. Feminism, yes. But the underlying human issue, probably not. So yeah, this has been quite a negative video, quite a depressing video. Fuck. Wow. I guess that's that. Don't really know what else to say. Guess I'll see you in the next one. Toodle pip.